Mm. Hi, Leah. Glad to see you here. Welcome to this side of the internet. How are you
Hi,
doing?
hi, Joey. It's really nice to be here having this chat with you. I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for honoring our invitations as always and for being part of our first conversation series. Yeah, so I will just share a brief about what this series is about, since it's the first, just so people know what we are talking about, what we are here rambling about, and yeah, and we'll just share with them what we hope to achieve with these conversations. Yeah. So this conversation series is part of our digital economies and the future of work. The Nawi Collective has recently dipped its toes into the world of digital economies and the future of work. And with this work, we'll be exploring the gig economy and what these constantly changing dynamics mean for the world of work. And through our observation and what we have learned over the past few months is that a lot of the narratives we have seen on this discourse in terms of digitalization, platformization, and the changing world of work have been confined to North American and European contexts, and which has meant that research and narratives in and on other parts of the world, particularly our African context, have not always got the attention that they deserve. And so it feels that we are constantly playing catch up with our counterparts in the global north. So in an effort to then counter this dynamic, we have curated a series of conversations to spotlight African feminists who work at these intersections and whose work is often overlooked in the contemporary debates of digitalization and platformization of labor. So in this first session, Leah and I will try to lay the ground for a Pan-African feminist perspective on digitalization and the future of work. And throughout the conversation, we'll just try to make sense of a datafied future of work, exploring how it began, what technology has meant for the labor market, and why platform-based work has gained so much traction, and what it means for the labor and employment question in Africa. And like I mentioned, with me today is a dear friend of mine, Leah Erenio. She's the most brilliant and kindest person you will ever find. And I'm so glad to have you as the first speaker, Leah, the first guest. And it's always a pleasure to listen and learn from you. You really, really have a way with words, and I'm excited to explore this work and this world with you. So welcome again. So we'll just start with introductions. Tell us a bit more about your wonderful self. Who is Leah? What does she like to do? What are her interests? What encourages you to get out of bed in the morning, if any? Yeah, just a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Joey. You've started with the most difficult question, which is asking me to talk about myself. For some reason, my brain always freezes. I prefer that other people talk about me. And as happens in life, I feel that my definition and my understanding of myself is constantly evolving. So what I'll say about myself now is probably different than I would have introduced myself a couple of months ago. So right now, professionally, I consider myself a political economy analyst, and my thinking tries as much as possible to adopt a Marxist framework of analysis. I would say that that's also a very new thing, proudly talking about Marxism. And that is, but also rooted in a very Pan-African feminist lens, understanding that Marxism also has very many blind spots when it comes to the gender question. And the fact that it does, a fantastic analysis on class. So it is the marrying of the two things, a class analysis and a feminist analysis that centers gender. Yeah, so I think that is where my thinking is situated now. What do I like to do? I like to read. I like an intellectual challenge. I like going down a rabbit hole of understanding a new concept. And I'm so glad that my work accords me opportunities to be able to do that. I like a good movie. I really like fantasy and lore, things like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. That's the sort of stuff that I like, but I also really like period dramas. So if you want to chat with me, those are the things that I think that I would talk about with lots of excitement. Yeah, so that's me.
So you said period drama. So is Bridgerton part of your Bridgerton fanatic?
Yeah, Bridgerton is a period drama, but it is not historically accurate, which is also nice. I think
Yeah.
it is an escapist
Mm,
type of world, and it's all ball gowns and frivolity, which is also nice. I mean, there is so much that is wrong with the world right now.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it feels nice to escape into the world of
Mm,
princes and nobility and royal houses and things like that. So yeah, it's exciting.
yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. And if anyone wants to chat with Leah, at least you know what her interests are. So those will be icebreakers. So into the thick of it and why we are here today. So, like I mentioned before, we are exploring the concept of the gig economy. What does this exactly mean? We keep hearing people mentioning that they have gigs over the weekend. I have a gig here. I'm doing a gig over here. So, I'm wondering, are gigs even considered quote unquote real jobs? Especially when you come to like the African context. Are you able to tell your African parent that I'm a gig worker, and then they'll be able to understand? Or is it part of our hustle culture of, I guess, millennials and Gen Zs and everyone below that? So what exactly is this concept of the gig economy, but also merging it with digitalization? What does gig work mean in the context of the digital economy? Yeah, so over to you, Leah.
Thank you, Joey. I think most times when people say they have a gig, there is that accepted understanding that there is some assignment, there is some task that has come up, there's some short-term job that has come up that someone is going to work on maybe for a couple of days or for a couple of hours and get paid at the end of it. I think there is less understanding of gig work as something to which people actually dedicate their lives full time, that is actually someone's only way of making a living. So, I mean, when we were younger, you also kind of knew that it was a thing that you do before you get formally employed. Or in my circles, it's usually an add-on that you do to your formal job. So they're like, oh, maybe they've asked me to write a paper. That's a gig. Because, it's like it's contract based. So yeah, so I think maybe the common characteristics are that, it is contract based, it is short term, but maybe what is less understood is that for some people, that is actually where they earn their livelihood, maybe 24/7, if I can say that. So gig work can be time-based, so there can be an hourly wage paid for a task. So when we think of platforms like TaskRabbit, where you're given an assignment, you do it, or like the other things I've talked about, you have someone says, write a paper, someone says, come and do what's it called? Live tweeting, like come and do like a social media thing. Like that's, that is like sometimes time-based, or it can be work that is of a piecework nature. So you do a task and then you get paid. When we think about things like Uber does not pay per hour. So even if I'm on a 2-hour journey, it will come up with a fee for just that one task. I'm not paid for like every minute that I'm sitting in traffic. And then gig work can also be determined based on its nature. So it can be web-based or location-based. So location-based, most times I think the most common thing is usually Uber, because it means that there's a car in some geographical location and a customer calls for it, and then someone comes. Or it can be web-based, exactly like the TaskRabbit that I talked about. You find the work online and you do it, you complete it. And then you're paid for it. So I think that is what gig work typically entails. When it comes to the digital economy, what gig work looks like in the digital economy, it's kind of different. Still related to some of the things that I've talked about already. But maybe first, let me try to explain what the digital economy would be. So when we just think about like all these economic activities and transactions that happen online that are enabled by digital technologies, that is what the digital economy is. So it can be something like social media.
My shopping cart that's unending, my endless shopping cart.
Exactly. So it can be your shopping cart on Amazon. It can be you making a request for an Uber, or it can be you selling something on Facebook Marketplace. All of that is the digital economy, right? However, when we start thinking about issues around labor relations, and by labor relations here, we're thinking about work specifically, where tasks are being undertaken within the digital economy, it invites us to think about something, the concept called the platform economy. And this is typically where people exert their labor. So platforms typically connect and mediate business and social interactions. They mediate interactions between those that are providing goods and services and those that are desiring them. Again, I will talk about Uber a lot because I think that in most contexts, many people have taken an Uber, and therefore when I talk about Uber, it is easy to understand, but also Uber has become the catch-all term to explain this kind of work.
Yeah, I've heard about the Uberization of work, Uberization, yeah.
Exactly. So what do we mean when we're talking about the Uberization of work? Because that is actually what we're talking about when we're thinking about platform economies. Because Uber is just a platform that brings a driver and the client that needs to be taken somewhere together. And there's so many platforms that are like that now. So it's Uber, but it can also be Jumia in the case for most African countries where you want to order some food, and it does not limit you to just one restaurant. It becomes a marketplace of things. So I'll go and say, oh, I want chicken, but where am I going to buy my chicken from? And a list of restaurants will come up. All of that is using that Uber model, or rather the platform economy model. So what is that model exactly? I'm going to talk about two things that characterize that platform business model. I'm going to talk about data, and I'm going to talk about also what labor looks like on what labor relations look like on a platform model. So the reason, the value proposition that platform economies usually make to businesses and to people who are looking to transact is that we're going to provide exposure, if I can use that term, just like I said earlier, that, you have all these restaurants that I can choose from. So let's say if a restaurant was in a certain part of Kampala, just by being like, previously, like that restaurant would be limited by just the people in that geographical location. And so Jumia comes and says, oh, I'm actually going to expand your market reach, because now even someone who's maybe 5 kilometers away can be able to order from you. So that is a value proposition. So how is this company able to make that value proposition? It's because it's collecting all this data about people. So these platforms are able to create a network infrastructure that aids that interaction between social groups. So it provides those connections, and that is really the value that it adds. So we could make an argument that in the present moment, actually, those platforms, their interest is less in actually generating value or generating revenue from the goods and services that are offered, as it is in generating value from the interactions that happen on those platforms, because those interactions provide certain intelligence that is so important and so valuable.
Is that why these days they call data the new oil? Is it the new oil?
Absolutely. And I'm going to try to explain how that comes about. Because if I go and use a certain digital platform, like whatever information I leave behind just by that interaction is not very important. But if 1 million of us go and interact, when that data is aggregated, when all of it is put together, it starts telling a story. It tells a story about what we desire, about our shopping habits, and that is where it becomes the new gold, or it becomes a new fact of production, because that information then can be sold to a third party, that then can advertise very directly to us. And that is why you'll see.
So I was going to talk about that. Sorry. No, I was going to just say that, is that why when you say something, like you just mentioned hotel, and then you'll start seeing ads about, they're like, what? Yeah.
Exactly. Like you search a hotel and suddenly ads are popping up about hotels. But usually it is not just any hotel. It is based on the interactions that you've had on all those different platforms, that then that information is curated towards you. And so then what you'll see is that when platforms are set up, actually usually in the first couple of years, they're just making losses. They're not necessarily, because they're just interested in gaining market share. They're interested in gaining as many customers as possible, because the more people they have, the better data that they have to be able to sell to third parties. And so that is why at the beginning, the platforms are so cheap. Do you remember how Uber was? Platforms are so
Yeah.
cheap. Do you remember Safe Border?
Yeah.
And for other people outside Uganda and maybe Kenya, Safe Border is like a motorbike ride hailing app. It's like Uber, but with. And at the beginning, it was dirt cheap. And what they would do, they were also trying to recruit drivers with all these attractive offers. I think they were giving them loans, or they were giving them bonuses. And for us, the clients, there were always all these discounts. Yes. So by offering those things, actually, the companies are making losses because they're losing money, but they're not interested in that. They're interested in something else. We're actually the product. So data is like a critical component of the platform economy. And then and because by gaining that data and by them having control of market share, they're also building a monopoly. And so then that monopoly builds economic and political power that helps them to shape the business environment. So it is not by accident that then we constantly use the term Uber, because Uber is the one that has been able to build that monopoly. And then that monopoly shapes how even other other apps, when they come into the market, they're not going to innovate anything different. They're going to
They
just
use the
adapt.
same model.
Exactly. Uber has already, because of the power that they have, they've already decided how the platform is going to work. The second thing that is critical to the platform business model is, as I said earlier, like labor relations. So they thrive and make money from misclassifying workers. So how do they misclassify workers? So workers on these apps are not employees of the platforms on which they work. They're actually looked at as independent contractors or partners to these companies. So then
And I think
yeah.
I had an experience, sorry, recently where I had an issue with an Uber driver, and so I tried to report because it was a really big issue. So they kept mentioning driver partner, and then I kept insisting, like your rider, like your rider, so that because it felt like they wanted to show that accountability is on the driver partner and not on them. So they kept trying to say that he's a partner, but we are not. He's accountable for his own actions. So it really baffled
Yeah.
me.
So that's exactly it. So these companies are trying to absolve themselves of any responsibility that typically comes with an employer-employee relationship. Both of us are employed right now, Joey, and so we know what obligations fall on our employers in terms of first providing a wage for the labor that we are providing, that our labor, because we're selling our labor, but also obligations extend to providing certain benefits around health, providing certain benefits around occupational health and safety. Like if you got an accident in the line of duty, your employer is responsible for that and things like that. But these companies do not want to have any sort of responsibility for that. So they have created a new thing. They've created this concept of the independent contractor and saying, yes, this is actually just our partner. But what comes to mind when you think of a partner? You're thinking of a situation where you're sharing the proceeds of the labor. Like, oh,
Exactly.
if I've made $1,000, since we are partners, there is a sharing agreement. There's going to be, we are going to share the cost, for example, of buying the car, because we're in business together, right?
Maintaining that
Exactly. We're going to share the costs of capitalizing the business. Like that is what
Yeah.
a partnership would be. So for yeah, things like that. But that is not actually what happens. Yeah. So this so-called partnership relationship is actually, when you look at it in practice, is an employer-employee relationship. And let me explain how this happens. So if I were an independent contractor, I should be able to make my own hours. I should be able to decide the price of my business. Should say, oh, you
Exactly.
want me to take you from point A to point B? Oh, that's going to be this much money. But that is not what happens. If I look at Uber again, right? It is an algorithm. It's something that I don't know, me as the driver, I don't even know what it is, but the price is decided for me. How can you then think that I'm an independent
I'm a
contractor?
partner.
I can't decide the price of my labor, right? And then the second thing is, I'm actually also being monitored, right?
Yeah, you're appraised every day. Yeah.
There is some sort of appraisal process that's happening. Every time you
Yeah.
do a ride, at the end of the day, there's going to be a prompt on the client
Yeah.
side asking you, how was the ride? Please rate
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it can
Yeah.
be 5 stars or none or 1 star. And if you've rated someone terribly, there is a penalty for that. The
Yeah.
people who have been locked out of the platforms, like domestic workers who work on these cleaning apps, because they went somewhere, maybe they broke something, or maybe they had a disagreement with the person that they were working for. And the penalty is we'll lock you out of the app. So you no longer even have access to be able to continue earning a living. So you can't say that that is not an employer-employee relationship,
And you are
right?
also talking about monitoring because a lot of times when like you're stuck in traffic, you'll get a prompt, are you okay? You've been in this place for too long. What can we do? And you're like, who
Yes,
is Big Brother around here?
right. And I remember the very first time I got that prompt, I was actually so impressed. I was like, oh, wow, Uber cares for my welfare. And that may be true, but it actually is a form of monitoring the driver as well. Why is the driver not
Yeah.
moving? So we are
But
also being
also, yeah.
unwittingly co-opted into that supervision, and we don't know it.
And the thing is, not all the time that it actually helps. Because the incident I was talking about earlier, I had an issue with the rider. And so when Uber brought the prompt, because apparently when you're on a ride, I could not contact support. So what helped is that they brought that prompt, are you okay? And so I said, no, I'm not okay. And I explained to them so that I quickly get like help or a response. And I didn't get it
And there
until the
wasn't.
next day.
Oh, wow.
There wasn't. So I had to deal with the situation with the driver in that moment. And like, I was really scared for my life in that moment. So in my mind after that, and that's why I wrote to them and told them if you have this app, what does safety mean for people who use your app? But they actually never even got like a proper response.
Wow, that is so interesting. So then our hypothesis that it is a monitoring tool is not far off because they did not
Yeah.
provide the help purportedly that they were wanting to provide in that moment when
Yeah.
you actually needed it. Wow. And you can see that it truly is an instrument for monitoring the driver and their
Mm,
activities. So yeah, so when you see this kind of obfuscation and of the employer-employee relationship to get out of the responsibilities that an employer has towards their employee, you can see that the relationship is patently exploitative. So,
mm,
I mean, the benefit of being employed is that I mean, if we look at the classic employer-employee relationship, like it's because you're usually saying that I do not have capital to purchase my own tools to be able to deliver this service. So you enter into an employer-employee relationship with a guarantee that the employer is actually going to purchase these tools for you, and all you have to do is sell your labor and the employer pays you a wage, right? But they provide the instruments. But now what you're seeing is not only do you have to buy your own tools, which would mean that you're the capitalist, which does not make sense, but you're buying your own tools, but you're also selling your labor, which does not
mm.
make sense at all. And on top of, so you you buy the tools in the form of a car, in terms of the cleaning tools that you'll need for cleaning the house. And then you go there and you perform the work, which means that you're selling your labor. Then in addition to that, you have to pay a rent to this so-called person
The
who's
app,
who's saying you're not the employer. So
yeah, yeah.
you're sharing the proceeds of your labor. So
Mm.
it is illogical. It is
It
illogical.
feels like a double expense. You'd
It
rather, yeah.
is. It is.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So I think that that is like really, really what makes the platform model
And
very, very.
yet the way that they sell it is like independence, flexibility. You'll be able to earn all this money and get rich, become a billionaire, like
Yeah.
the hustle culture I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. So it's really those two things that characterize the platform model of work, that is
Mm,
classification and exploitation of workers. And that
mm,
second thing that I talked about earlier, which is about mining data of the workers themselves and the decisions that they make, and also mining the data of clients so that then products can be sold to them in the future.
Okay, so many questions, so many things to think about, so many things to unpack. I know a lot of people who have left I know actually like a friend who left their job to do like ride hailing full time, but the numbers were not adding up. I was having a conversation with him and he was saying the numbers are not adding up. I left like this job where every month you have like unexpected salary, yes, the working conditions are not the best, but this other side where I also sold flexibility, self employment, you make your own hours, you make your own, it's also not adding up because on top of selling your labor, you have to pay someone a rent. And I never looked at it like that. So essentially, yeah, it's like you have a business of some sort. I don't anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and not even withstanding that the internet that you have to buy that's so exorbitant in countries like ours, and you have to be online all the time. Okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
many things. So then in terms of all that we have discussed, and I know that we are focusing a lot on digitalization and the digital economy. So how has this changed the world of work or changed the nature of work? I know you have hinted on the the obscuration of the employer-employee relationship, and how a lot of these relations people are hiding behind partnering and creating new dynamics that perhaps were not there before. So, how has digitalization essentially changed the world of work, the world of labor relations, and particularly what has this meant for our continent? How has it manifested on our continent? And of course, bringing it back home, what does this, in the grand scheme of things, mean for African women? Yeah.
Yeah. So, how has the world of work changed? Number one, we're having this conversation on Zoom. A few
Well.
years ago, if we had wanted to have this conversation, we probably might have had to book a studio.
Mm-hmm.
We probably might have had to, yeah, obviously would have had to go there, like make time out of our day and yeah. So there's a world of convenience that has been created uh, with the digital technologies. There's been so much innovation. Like for all intents and purposes, some parts of our lives have become easier. But I also think that that convenience has come at a cost. And some of the things that we talked about earlier are show what that cost looks like in practice. So these days, we have meetings in the comforts of our home. Uh, um, if I was going somewhere and maybe I was late on an assignment, I can keep doing that work on my laptop as I
Your
relax.
phone. Yeah.
No, I can relax in the back of an Uber as someone drives me. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
like there is this,
yeah,
yeah. But if I got home late, I could, or I didn't have time to eat. I mean, I didn't have time to prepare food. I could make an
you can
order.
order. Yeah.
The world of work has changed, but the truth is, for the African continent, all the things that I've talked about, it's a very, very small, very, very small proportion of people's lives that have changed this way. Like by and large, a lot of the work is still done offline. So this is honestly a very, very middle class, very wealthy people experience. So I think it's important to understand that even when we're talking about digitalization in the context of Africa, it is so far removed from the very many things that people talk about when they're talking about the digital economy. However, the conversation is very important for us to have because we are the next frontier for that exploitation. And the examples we
Yeah.
talked about earlier are already telling us that those problems that are at our doorstep and we must deal with them.
With narratives of untapped potential of
Yes.
Africa. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's a perfect thing to talk about first. That idea of untapped potential in the African continent, and therefore the opportunities that this gig work within the digital space provides. So what people are being sold on first of all, because we have in most African countries a really high rates of unemployment, and so people have really had to fend for themselves in the informal economy. What these platform economies have basically said to people is that, you know, this is just another way for you to make money, but perhaps it's more money, perhaps it is safer, perhaps it is more predictable income than maybe the other things that you've been doing, maybe working in the market or whatever it is, other ways that people earn a living in the informal economy. So wage-based employment is still not a reality for most people. So when those platform comes, it kind of makes sense for quite a number of African people that are looking to make a living. And then, you know, there is also that desire for flexibility and independence that we talked about earlier. So it truly is a great value proposition. However, what then ends up happening is the digital economy or platform economies specifically are instead entrenching informalization. So they are saying that they're creating work, but it is important for us to challenge and question the kind of work that they're creating. Because like the things that we talked about earlier, this is not work that is safe. This is work that is precarious. And we could say that it might even be more precarious than some of the work that other people have been doing already. Because one of the things that we said is, on top of having to look for your own capital, you're also having to pay a rent to this platform, right? So what we're seeing is it is not dealing with the problem of precarious work on the African continent. It is instead increasing that precarization by entrenching informalization, because even when you get work, you're still not going to have access to work benefits. You're not going to have access to health insurance. You don't have a wage. You don't have so many things. So they're not
and it's
really dealing.
And it's interesting that you actually say that, because now I've remembered someone that he was my quote unquote boda guy, and he wanted to venture into ride hailing, and so but he didn't have a car, and so he has to rent a car, and on top of renting the car, he has to pay like a weekly rent to the person who owns the car, and then on top of that has to pay for the platform, and then servicing, fueling the car, just general maintenance of the car is also on him. So we were recently having a conversation earlier this year, and he was talking about the same thing I said earlier, that he had thought that with riding a car, his life would improve a lot, because I mean, by the end of the month, he's getting much more than he was getting as a border rider. But with all these expenses, it's actually worse. He's worse off than he was when he had his border, because with the border, it was his. He would put very little fuel. He had so many customers. So it didn't, it was not making sense. And he's actually worse off, because he was telling me how he wasn't able to pay his child's school fees for like the first month, the first term, his rent. Like life has become worse yet.
Yeah, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of the platform workers have also complained that this algorithm that decides the price of a service does not take into account the local context. It does not take into account the only thing maybe it takes into account is usually like a surge in requests. So at peak hours, like when there
At
are
peak hours.
requests, then the cost of the service might go up. But it does not take into account that there is inflation. So it does not, it will not care that the cost of fuel has increased, right? Such that then
Yeah.
you have very little to take home. It will not take into account any of the economic issues that are prevalent in that area. And that is really one of the things that platform workers have been complaining about. So that, you know, that self-employment model is really just getting re-entrenched. It is not helping with any kinds of labor relations. And so then that becomes a problem. The other thing that I want to talk about, that I've really been thinking about deeply, about how the world of work has changed in the context of the digital economy, is that I feel, based on my reading and my analysis, that we're moving to a world that is free of workers. Or maybe I should say, there is a fiction that is being created that we are moving into a world without labor, and yet that labor is still there and still powering our lives day in, day out. So I think that there is just something very diabolical and very dystopian about that. And I'm going to share an example that I think a lot of people in the digital space have talked about. And that was, there is this technology that Amazon developed where you could just walk into an Amazon store, pick something off the shelf and walk out of the store, and you'd be billed on your, as long as you had an Amazon account, you'd be billed automatically. So, it was touted as this very effective and efficient way of doing things. And it meant that you did not have to interact with a cashier. Yeah. There was so much excitement that was built around it, right? What, I can just walk into a store. So for me, the question that I'm asking myself is, why is it so important that we have to create a cashier-less checkout system? Why is it so important that the worker is removed from the equation? But the thing that is very interesting about the Amazon story is that in actuality, it was not their technology that was enabling that seamless, they called it just walkout technology. There were actually workers employed in India that were monitoring the people that walked into the store and manually entering or verifying the things that had actually been taken off the shelf.
So there are still people who are doing, you're
Yes.
just not seeing them.
So there are people who are still doing the work, but we are being duped. We're being duped. There are no workers involved. So we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? So my hypothesis, I think this is not something necessarily new, that businesses are always trying to cut down the cost of production, right? And typically, one of the things that costs a lot of money, machines cost a lot of money, by the way, because you have to invest a lot of money in research and development in order to develop a certain technology that enables you to do a certain thing more efficiently, better, etc. However, machines do not need to be fed. They don't need to be paid a wage. They're not going to complain about sexual harassment. They're not going to go on maternity leave. So so businesses prefer machines at the end of the day because while they'll be expensive, they become cheaper in the long run. You always have to pay people in perpetuity. As long as you've employed them, you're always going to have to employ them. So there is that desire to remove them from the equation, right?
So no office politics.
Yes. The problem is our world and the technology that we have right now is still not able to run without human beings. And I think that is what that Amazon story shows. And yet, in spite of that, there is a desire to dupe us into thinking that there are no machines. What does that achieve? I think number one, what it does, it makes us think that we don't have to worry about workers' rights. Because after all, they're interacting with machines. There is this veil that is created that makes us think less about workers' welfare. Because at the end of the day, you're either just pressing buttons or you're just working out. Yeah. But I think what these technologies are also banking on is they're leveraging on an increasingly atomized world where we're so individualistic, we don't know how to interact with other human beings except through a
Exactly.
computer screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the world that we live in now is social media. You go and abuse people online. Like our interactions
Mm.
are always digitally mediated, such that, by the way, it's getting harder and harder for us to
It,
interact as human beings.
it is so much. I was
What
having
does
the
that
same
mean? I don't know.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was having the same conversation with a friend over the weekend, and I was telling her with remote working, I don't know how to socialize anymore because there's something that, like working in an office, interacting with people daily, like I'm easily irritable. I just want to stay home. It's more comfortable because then I don't have to deal with anyone. Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is so interesting, I don't know if you've seen, there's a meme that constantly goes around where someone says, oh, they get into an Uber and the driver does not say anything. And the response from the
There's
driver
that option.
is to give them 5 stars. So like, because there was absolutely no interaction between you and the Uber
Mm,
driver,
and
the Uber driver did not make any kind of small talk. You're like, that's exactly the kind of interaction I desire.
so interesting because there's that option on I think I traveled to, I think it was Ghana where I first saw that option. So they give you an option. Do you want the driver to talk? Like, do you want a quiet ride or a driver who talks? so, so puzzled. I was
I
like, okay, I
know, right? So I
think
mean,
Ghanaians really like to talk. So I think it was really weird for them. Yeah.
so I think yeah, that is really interesting because I mean, on the one hand, there's certain days when you're just tired and you're just like, I really don't
Yeah.
want small talk. But we also
Yeah.
have to admit that there is something about a digitally mediated world that has made us desire human interaction less. So it is so interesting that you might not want to talk to the driver, but you will be talking to people on the phone that you will have. You will talk to
Exactly.
them, but because you're just an avatar on Twitter or
Mm,
X, whatever you want to call it, like that interaction is so much easier. So platforms are I think entrenching that sort of, it is, for me, it is honestly a dehumanization of us, right? And
mm,
I feel that, and capitalism breeds on dehumanization. So for me, my
mm,
hypothesis is what capitalism is doing, or the way the digital economy is structured by capitalism, is that it abstracts workers into just computer code. So you remember the phrase,
mm,
you're just a cog in the machine, right? To just
mm,
explain how workers have no real power. You're just there, you come, you do your
mm,
task, and then someone else is able to make like ridiculous profits off your labor. I think that there is nothing that exemplifies that more than what the digital sphere is doing to workers. Now you're not just a cog in the machine, you're just binary code, you're just ones and twos. And that is the extent of my interaction with you. So I don't see you as a human being. So I don't have to empathize with you. I don't want to hear
mm,
you small talk and learn about all your
mm,
problems. I want you to pretend that you're a machine. So I
mm.
think
Yeah.
workers are being made into machines. And I also think that the more we interact with platforms in that regard, I think that we are also becoming machine-like. And so we don't desire human
Yeah.
interaction. And therefore, that's why we're excited about Amazon inventing just walkout technology where you don't have to interact with, you're just like, oh my goodness, that's the best thing. What does that mean for us
Yeah, as human beings.
as human beings, right?
And yet on the other hand, I know if we turn to the side of sex work, I know a lot of sex workers have come up and said a lot of people who want their services sometimes just want to talk because they actually don't have anyone to talk to. So they pay like maybe whatever platforms, OnlyFans or whatever platform you're on, and someone pays you to just talk to them for whatever duration of time, and they'll pay top dollar for that. So then we want the human connection, but we still want it with a like through digitally mediated platforms. Like
Yeah, I really
it's a
like
bit
that. I
confusing.
really like that you bring up sex work. And I want to talk
Mm,
about, and I really want to link that to the point I just made about dehumanization, and actually in the context of sex work, really looking at objectification specifically. I don't know
mm,
if you've heard about instances where like some kind of AI has been created for sex work, not just AI, but like I think they're those sex robots.
the robots, yes, I've
Yeah.
heard of the robots.
And typically, what has happened is people have then, um, I think one of the things that they have done very quickly is to carry out their wildest and most violent
Mm,
fantasies
mm,
on those or on the sex work AI, for lack of a better term, but also
mm,
for those robots. So there is something about the digital sphere again that enables that dehumanization and that gives permission for people to act on their worst desires. And so then if we, for example, if we just look at the discourse on social media and the
mm,
level of violence, violent rhetoric, the doxing,
mm,
most of those things, people are actually not able to do that in person. But there
mm,
is something about the veil of the digital sphere that just gets rid of all the guardrails. Again, back to that question of how do we interact with each other when we no longer look at each other as human beings? So I think that in
mm,
the realm of sex work, the digital sphere also allows people to look at, of course, the objectification already happens offline, but I think that there is another level that of permissiveness that the digital sphere enables, such that you can act out your worst fantasies, you can be as
mm,
violent as you possibly can to women, or even to the AI that is like a proxy for a real sex worker. And that is really, really problematic. So that
mm,
world where human beings have been dehumanized means that capitalism can exploit more, but it also means that then it is so much harder to organize. It is so much harder to
mm,
unionize. Because remember, for you, the workers, you're just binary code. How do you even come together and demand for better work
mm,
conditions? But also, for other people, for the clients that are using the platform, again, like I said earlier, you're duped into thinking that this is not necessarily a human being. So you don't have to
you don't have
advocate.
to think about,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. For many of us, like this world is so new and obscure. We don't know anything that happens. Yeah.
Mm,
So I think that in terms of a changing world of work, really, these are some of the things that have
mm.
changed in really, really scary ways. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Leah. And I think it's interesting when you talk about how we don't consider thinking about workers' rights within that context. And yet, during the pandemic, these are the same workers who are considered essential workers. So suddenly you could not live without your delivery worker. Suddenly you could not live without like all these people who are bringing things to you, because like you actually need them, and they had to put their lives at risk for then the comfort that you were earlier talking about. So I think this is also a perfect segue into why should we care? And particularly feminists, African feminists, and people working within labor practitioners. So why should feminists be concerned about this new, not really new per se, but this world of digitalization and the world of work? Yeah, why should we be concerned?
Yeah. So I think really relating to what we've discussed already, I think this digital space really just entrenches existing prejudices and biases. There's a reproduction of sexism and things that really just entrench gender inequalities. I'm not even going to go into a conversation about AI and how like AI is basically a mirror on society, and it basically regurgitates all the information that it has been fed. So, all this information that is racist, sexist, and all those things, like that is already problematic. When we look at platform economies specifically, there is still a gender division of labor. I mean, the gender division of labor where, women are corralled into very specific sectors that pay them very little. That is still the same when it comes to digital platforms. So women are still concentrated in platforms like domestic work, providing beauty products, those quote unquote stereotypically feminine sectors, while men are concentrated in like ride hailing. I have been using Uber for very many years, but I think I can count on just one hand how many times I've had a woman driver. On one hand, it could have been maybe 2 or 3 times. So that reproduction of the gender division of labor, is still something that is quite concentrated. And I think that we can relate that to the business model of platform economies that we talked about earlier. The issues around having to basically bring your own, you have to capitalize your own business. And we know that women tend to have less in terms of economic assets, in terms of property, in terms of just money to be able to purchase those things. So in order to drive an Uber, you're either going to have to buy your own car or you're going to rent from someone. So then women, eventually end up being segregated into sectors where the cost of acquiring capital is much cheaper, such as domestic work. So that is, quite problematic. So I think that is something that feminists should be caring about. And then I think that also digital platforms lower the cost of labor. So one of the things that we have been fighting about as feminists for the longest time is just the gender wage gap that men are paid a higher wage than women for basically doing the same work. So this is also related to the thing that I've talked about already, like that occupational segregation where women tend to be corralled into more feminized sectors and therefore they make less. But there is something about widening the marketplace that creates an oversupply of labor. So remember how I said, previously, you had your little taxi and people coming to you and then negotiating a price. Now you have so many more competitors because you're all on the same platform. And so then that reduces the cost of labor. But beyond that, these digital platforms also crowd out small businesses and actually sometimes forces businesses to close. So when you think about, for example, the restaurant and food service platforms, you need a certain amount of capital to be able to be listed on Jumia, for example, because remember, you're going to have to pay a commission to Jumia, right? You're going to have to pay a rent. For most, women-owned businesses, they're not able to do that because their businesses are not that big. And in some instances, people who used to order food from the smaller restaurants are now going to the platform to have access to other restaurants because it does provide ease and convenience for them. So there is just that lowering of the cost of labor and also crowding out and shutting down small businesses as a result. And then the other thing that I think is really, really important is something that we talked about earlier, about asking ourselves the question, what does a world where workers are not seen as workers look like, and what does it portend for issues that are specific to women? And here I want to bring up the issue of social reproduction. When we're talking about social reproduction, for most people, I think the term that they will understand is care work or unpaid care work, but I want to expand it because it goes beyond care work. When we're talking about social reproduction, we're literally talking about the work that sustains life, the work that gives life and sustains life. So it can be biological reproduction, as in you're literally giving birth to children who are going to become workers in the future. And they don't just become workers automatically, they are trained to become workers. And that is work that is usually relegated to women. And by training to become workers, I'm meaning giving them good manners, like, oh, you're not supposed to steal. Like just that providing of norms, like that norm shaping work, like that is work that women do. Yes, so it can be something like that. It can be work, feeding children, feeding husbands who are going out to work, looking after the elderly. All of that is social reproduction work. So if this platform economies, these platforms are saying that the people that work on their platforms are not workers but independent contractors, it means that they're not giving them certain benefits that are critical. So women that have worked on these platforms have asked for things like maternity leave. And that is not something that is possible anymore. But you also have to understand, some people have argued that these platforms work on a male breadwinner logic. And that male breadwinner logic, if you're a male breadwinner, you don't need maternity leave. That's the first thing. But also, if you look at the hours that need to be maintained, in order for you to even make something from these platforms, they actually tend to favor men. So usually women are attracted to these platforms by the allure of flexibility. So on the one hand, it will enable them, because it's difficult for women to also be in the workforce because it makes it very difficult for them to juggle the socially ascribed roles of social reproduction, of care work, etc. So here they're saying, oh, you can make your own hours, right? But if you look at the point at which it is most profitable to work, it's usually at night or very early in the morning. And most times women are actually not able to make those hours, because either they're having to be at home to take care of those socially ascribed roles, or it's simply unsafe. So it really just favors, it does not favor women, it does not pay for the cost of social reproduction. And yet women are doing that really, really important task of producing workers in the future. So for me, that becomes concerning. The issue, and this is not to say that social reproduction is already recognized outside the digital sphere. It isn't. It's already a battle that we are fighting. However, the digital sphere makes it so much harder because people are not even recognized as workers. So then it increases that battle several fold. Yeah. So I think that is very problematic.
I think when you talk about as well safety, one of the I read an article sometime, but also speaking to a lot of women gig workers, there's an article I read that was titled "Safety Has Become Another Full-Time Job." So on top of thinking about all the things that you have to think about when it comes to work and everything that you have mentioned, you have to add that aspect of safety and having to buy tools that actually help with your safety, if they can even help. So thinking about things like sexual harassment or the kind of work hours that you have to work. So you have to think about protecting yourself. And your partners do not really care about this. You can't report when you have had an incident. I mean, clients can report when they've had an incident with a rider, for example, but the riders don't have a place where they can report these clients when harm has been imposed. So thinking about all that, but also in terms of care work, you see maybe that like violence against women that has increased. Because if there's a bad day, your partner has had a bad day at work or with Uber, the frustrations are then going to go on you, and then you have to hold space for all that. So you're
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the example that you made, the issue that you raised about so that the platform favors clients over the workers themselves. So earlier when I talked about, that context that of workers become like binary code, they become like computer code. Even they never speak to a human when they're lodging their complaints. They're speaking to some AI assistant, right? They're speaking to a chatbot. So even they have no recourse, and most times, yes, it's the clients that will be listened to. The workers will simply be locked out of the app. And being locked out of the app means that I might not have money to buy a meal that day. So it's incredibly problematic that clients' lives are also valued over and above the lives of the workers themselves. And I think it's important that we get to a place where both those issues are addressed to the same degree, that client safety is looked at as important, and the same thing for driver safety and welfare as well, not one over the other. Yeah, so I think something else that feminists should really care about when it comes to digital technologies is maybe this could be less talked about, but we need to think about how much revenue we lose from these companies coming to do business in our countries, but not paying their fair share of taxes. So for the African continent specifically, there is billions of dollars that's lost annually because of illicit financial flows, but specifically losses that come from like corporate tax avoidance. So for example, as Uber, you're actually making revenue in an African country. You make money by a client, you're doing business, and so you're making money. A client pays, and so that's how you make money. But where is Uber headquartered, and therefore where does it pay its taxes? So it's not just like the digital space specifically, because now we've moved away from brick and mortar shops where just like, oh, your shop is based here, so this is a jurisdiction where you pay your taxes. Now companies are in the cloud. Where do you pay your taxes? Yeah. So in the African context, revenue that we really, really, really need, and there is nothing else that showed how much we needed that revenue more than the pandemic. We literally had no money to respond. So I think critical, I mean, obviously there is a lot to unpack about where those taxes would have been allocated anyway. That's a whole other conversation. But in terms of how much we lose because, these multinational corporations come here, do their business and do not pay taxes is something that families should really, really care about, because that means that it takes away critical revenue that could be used for resourcing public services.
And it's interesting actually that you bring it up. And I hate that most of the examples are with Uber, but as we mentioned at the start, in terms of Uberization of work and how Uber has monopolized this platform mode of work. I was reading something around Uber's Champion League of tax avoidance, and how these new forms of tax avoidance are coming up. So they claim to be a technology company as opposed to a taxi company. So then it does not pay taxes to the local authorities where it's operating. And then obviously with the competitiveness, like you mentioned, where it's cutting costs, and then they have these lower fares, that means that they are sacrificing like the taxes that would then be paid by other taxi companies, because then the rates are considerably lower. So yeah, just something I thought I would mention.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing that maybe it's not necessarily the last thing, but in terms of the thinking that the thinking process that I went through is in terms of the digital economy and what feminists should be caring about. I think we need to think about the environmental cost of the digital economy. So this planet that we live on, if it does not exist, if it's not healthy, we can't even start talking about decent work and minimum wage and worker welfare, because we'll be dead anyway. Like we'll all be dead. So caring for the environment is so important. But I think most times when we're thinking about environmental concerns, of course, we are going to think about fossil fuel emissions. You see a factory and there is smoke coming out of it. You're like, you can say, oh, that's pollution. You see a swamp that is being reclaimed and you're like, oh, you're destroying the environment. There's ecological breakdown happening there. You see a place with like lots of plastic bags. You say, oh, there's a problem there. But when it comes to the digital space, it's so difficult to imagine that. And most times we're being told, oh, our data is in the cloud, right? Like that term, it is such a lie. Like the idea of the cloud is patently false. The cloud is actually a physical infrastructure. It's actually a bunch of servers where our data is stored. So it is not some abstract thing in the air where our data goes and stays there until you call it, open your whatever, and then it comes. It's actually stored on on physical things, yeah? And the cost and the amount of energy required to keep those physical servers running is so ridiculous, yes? It's so ridiculous that now they're saying that the cloud, this cloud that they talk about, has a greater carbon footprint than the airline industry. Remember, most times when we're thinking about who are the biggest polluters, we'll think about airlines.
We always think
We
private
think about
jets.
shipping, exactly. No, these servers and how does and how does this environmental cost come about? So because the servers are constantly running, they heat up. They actually need to be cooled. So they can be cooled. So first of all, obviously, the cost of the electricity to run the funds. So server farms, that's what they call them now, because they can go for acres and acres of land. They need, because they're constantly running, they heat up, and so they need to have fans that are cooling them all the time. And the second thing is sometimes those fans are also powered by, like some people use just the fans, use air, and other people use water. So in some places, you're finding that now water scarcity is developing, etc., etc. It is ridiculous. And the reason why the servers need to keep running is because if they shut them down for a little bit, you would not be able to access your data.
Access my photos.
Not just that, but every time you hear like, oh, WhatsApp is down, it means that something has happened.
Yeah.
Something has happened to the server and has interrupted that process. So they need to make sure that, information is always at the tip of our fingers. We can't be inconvenienced by 2 minutes. Yeah, so it has to, the server has to be running. And then there is another backup server and a backup and a backup. So if one
backup
thing,
of the backup.
the other one so that's how the platform works. And yeah, just the cost of maintaining that is ridiculous. But the other component that I actually didn't know about, and maybe we don't know about this yet because we don't have server farms that are at a grand scale like the US, but all those things that are coming here soon. I mean, I actually found out that there's a server farm in Bugolobi. I did not know this, very interesting. But they're not yet at the scale that they are in the US. So because they are so massive in some places, they make so much noise that they create like noise pollution. So you know how for us right now, our problems are, there's a church, there's a church nearby that never sleeps, or there's a bar that plays. Other people are struggling with the noise from those server farms. And I don't think they're necessarily as loud as bars or churches, but the noise is so
The
monotonous and
constant,
drowning.
yeah.
It's like that constant monotonous noise that just makes it so difficult. Like some people are stressed and becomes an issue.
Mm,
So there is that noise pollution, but there is also pollution that comes from actual waste that is produced from technological
mm,
products like
mm,
old computers and cables and things like that. And where do all those things end up? In landfills on this continent. You know, we've had
mm,
stories about like computers being disposed of in Ghana and things like that. So that is the new normal. So there is a huge cost to the environment. But because every time we think about technology, we are thinking about some obscure thing that is very difficult for us to understand in a layperson's
mm,
language, it makes us think that there isn't a physical cost to it. Yeah. So, you know, every time we're thinking about a feminist economic analysis, we always think about the household and the work that then the reproductive labor that women perform at that level and how that enables the productive economy to continue unimpeded. But the
mm,
second component of feminist economics is concern for the environment, because we know that if the environment is destroyed, first of all, that work of social reproduction and the labor of social reproduction increases for women. But at the same time, none of us will be alive. Yeah, the environmental cost takes a toll on all of us. So then ecological breakdown becomes quite a feminist concern. But because we don't think about digital technologies as destroying the environment, it is important that we as feminists start thinking about it. Yeah, so those are some of the things that I think we should be thinking about.
a lot to unpack, a lot of questions coming up. And I think it's quite difficult with an intersectional lens to look at it in one way. I mean, we came thinking, okay, workers' rights, and now we are talking about ecological breakdowns. So yeah, I guess that's what a feminist lens gives us, the burden of it. So I think we need to try to wrap up this conversation. I know that with this series, we are going to keep unpacking a lot of issues concerning this area of work. But as we continue with the work, and as people who listen to this conversation, I know the next thing will be, so what do we do? Do we just give up? I mean, with everything that's going wrong, with all the genocides happening, and then I now have to think about tipping my Uber driver. I have to think about their well-being. I have to be concerned about everything that's happening. And yet, ideally, with technology, I'm not supposed to be thinking about some certain things. So how do we move on, or is there a point of hope? What does organizing around this work look like? Yeah, so just I guess like mini parting shot, because I'm hoping that we will hear from you soon. But yeah, so how do we move from here?
Yeah, so I've said previously that this is a fight of David versus Goliath. When we think about these platforms, most of them have a market capitalization that is several times our GDPs, like for most African countries. If you look at companies such as Meta, if you're looking at Alphabet, which is the parent company for Google, if you're looking at Apple, if you're looking at Uber, they're valued in the billions of dollars, and some of them now in the trillions of dollars. The companies that have our data and that now have so much power to decide how our lives might potentially look like. Amazon does not just have a lot of money, it has so much control. Like most websites are hosted on Amazon Web Services, so they control the traffic of the things that we search. There's just so much, right? So it feels overwhelming. And also, yeah, like learning about what work looks like in the digital economy also can make one feel despondent. And unfortunately, that is the cost of consciousness, right? It's just like, oh, I wish I didn't know about this, and then I'd continue in bliss. But such is life and such is adulthood, that at a certain point, this information will be thrust in front of you. And I think that there is an obligation then on your part to do something now that you know about it. I think there is so much that needs to change, but I think I'm going to focus on one thing, and that is really because I'm going to focus on this because I think it also creates the groundwork and enables the critical organizing that is required around labor relations in the digital economy. And I think that is looking at the legal and policy framework around labor and around work. So the pace of technological change is like whiplash. It is changing so quickly. I mean, if I think about where I was last year, so at the time, like there was like this big launch of ChatGPT, I was writing my master's dissertation. Maybe that was June, I think it was around May, June of 2023. That was the first ChatGPT that was launched. We are now on ChatGPT 4.0. So there have been so many iterations within this, and the technology has advanced so much, it's ridiculous. What you asked, the way ChatGPT responded to things when I asked it in May of 2023 is very different than ChatGPT now. Yeah, I'm just using that to illustrate the pace at which technology is changing. How often does our legal and policy framework change? Our legal and policy framework, even before we think about digital technologies, has been so unfit for purpose because when it comes to work, it has almost always protected only those in wage-based employment. If you think about the Ugandan context, for example, and you're looking at the Employment Act, the Employment Act caters for just, I don't know how many, 2 million people. There's so few people that are in wage-based employment. The majority of people are in informal work. The majority of people on the African continent are in formal work, and the majority of those are women, which means that they don't have any protections to begin with. Now, injecting this digital economy with all the exploitations that I have to, it just creates an environment to supercharge that exploitation. So our legal and policy frameworks need to be revised really, really quickly to recognize the different ways in which this work is changing so that then worker protections can be guaranteed. I mean, earlier when I was talking about the entrenchment of gender inequities within the world of work on digital platforms, when we look at most labor laws, they're almost always clauses around discrimination based on gender, race. But right now, the digital economy does not have, because first of all, people are not considered employees.
Workers, yeah.
The companies don't have to adhere to those requirements.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like we don't have to think about like racial equity or gender equity or any of those things. And so they're exploiting that loophole because there is actually no legal and policy framework to hold them accountable on those things. Accountability around worker protections and worker benefits, in spite of the fact that in practice, it truly shows that this is an employer-employee relationship.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I think the legal and policy framework will enable us to be able to catch up. And then, because now the status of workers would change, that is what will also enable them to unionize in a space of legality. Because remember, it's the employment law that guarantees that right of association and therefore the right to strike, the right to withhold your labor. You can't withhold your labor when you're not even...
When you're not considered. Yeah.
Exactly. You're not working with your employer. So I think that is really, really difficult. So I think above anything else, like that is one of the things that need to change. But in order for the legal and policy framework when it changes, for it to truly be responsive, it truly needs to understand the experiences of workers within the digital space. So it means that you need to use an intersectional lens. You need to understand what marginalizations look like. And if you don't use an intersectional lens, it means that there's certain things that are going to be missed. So I think that is important. However, as a continent, there truly is an opportunity. Like I said, as we began, that some of these things are coming a little later to our continent. The challenge that we're facing now is we're not creating alternatives or what digital platform work could look like. The digital economy is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. But we have an opportunity to say that we are going to do it differently, right? But now the problem is, even where African companies are creating these platforms, they're just copying and pasting the exploitative model, that have already been created, because it also makes it easy for them. But I think African governments have a duty of care, some sort of responsibility to say, we are going to want to do this differently. So let us first change the legal and policy framework that then enables any new platforms that are developing to treat workers differently. But also we are learning so much from other places where this model of work is already well established. We're seeing how it's actually not working for workers. So we have an opportunity to get ahead of that and develop alternatives that think differently. There are already some places that are testing out cooperatives, like worker cooperatives. It basically means that the platform is owned by the workers themselves. So it means that whatever the decisions are that you decide, that it's for the benefit of all the workers. It means that you're looking for something that is more collective, where you're looking to share the cost of the profits. You're looking at sharing the cost of capitalization of the business. Like, and perhaps that is the kind of model that we need. But this is not going to be possible if there is no support legally that enables you to be able to make certain claims. So I think that in going forward, truly, that is one of the things that is really important. We can actually even look at the UK example, where the UK government legislated and said, no, Uber drivers are going to be looked at as workers. And I think there was a minimum wage that was then established. But you see, the thing is, we also have to understand that, of course, in the grand scheme of things, we have, because we are such small economies, like, are so desperate for business, they're so desperate for investors, that workers' welfare comes as an afterthought. Welfare should be at the center of thinking about what investments should look like. Yeah.
And I truly like that, because what the narratives that you see even with our governments is, let the investors come, like first deal with it, and then they speak about, oh, there's a lot of unemployment, but you're not looking at the standard and the quality of work that you're actually asking people to bring here. So I don't even know how long this is, but I hope that this conversation has tried to make sense of the gig economy, gig work, and why it has gained a lot of traction, and why we are now venturing into this work, and why as feminists and people who are working within these areas need to be aware and cautious about what's happening in the cloud. So thank you so much, Leah, for making that time and for sharing your knowledge, your brilliance with us. And we hope to host you again soon. And to everyone who has watched this, thank you for staying till the end. And see you on the next episode.